Good morning.
Well, it's so nice to see you again. I am thrilled to have you on my podcast. You were an important force in expanding my view of AI, generative AI, and I'd like to introduce you to everybody and everyone. This was my professor at an online course that I took on generative AI at MIT, and Dr. Abel Sanchez was an incredibly inspiring person that presented words and information that had never entered my fashion brain before. And I had to work super hard and listen to lectures 3 times and spend a lot of extra time trying to take it all in. But he really was stellar, and I love having you here to talk to everyone about what's going on, big picture and details. So I read your bio and I thought, oh my God, he's like a mastermind. He's done so many amazing things. If you could give us your background and a little bit of history on who you are for my audience so that we can get into some fun conversation. Thank
Sure.
you for thank you for this.
So first of all, thank you very much for your kind words. Believe it or not, these are the comments I think we live for, to try to bring some clarity to a fast-changing world and to share some of what we see at times. It's challenging for everyone, ourselves included, and trying to get some clarity is what we spend our times doing. And so I'm happy that some of what I did could be of help, and thank you again for your kind words. When it comes to myself, I've spent my life in technology. I came to the university, to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, better known as MIT. As I like to say, they made the mistake of admitting me, and I never left. Right, so it's a wonderful place to work, full of bright people and wonderful ideas. And by the way, I should say, I'm speaking for myself, not my institution. These are personal views and that I'm happy to share. But I just wanted to make that distinction. So I've spent my life working on data. Using data to make better decisions is a potential that we all have in our lives. As you heard me say, when it comes to our abilities as humans, we are quite limited, right, in what we can connect to the world with. I talked about the number of 150 people when it comes to meaningful relationships, even going back in history, to the early days of the phone. Although we might have known lots of people, the ones we really called all the time were about 5, right? And when it comes to what we can hold in our heads, is about 7 plus or minus 2. And so we need data to be able to interpret the world and support our decision making. And I talk in the course about the evolution that has taken. But when it comes to my career, I've spent my life trying to make that possible, and it's gotten easier. And certainly, as we talked about in the course, there's some tremendous leaps forward when it comes to technology. But it's been challenging. We've struggled, and no doubt we can use it in some very well-defined cases. But when it comes to the broad promise of what we can do with data, we're still at the outset. So I'd be happy to expand or talk more about any of the areas.
Um, so I think one of the really profound realizations that I have right now is that the world will never be the same again in a way that's more profound than ever in my lifetime as a result of much of what you work on and talk about. Um, it's moving so quickly. Even in the course, there were discussions about how revisions on what we were talking about would be happening as quickly as we were having the conversation. So
Yeah.
when you think about the world will never be the same again, what what does that mean to you in a conversation like this?
Sure. So let me talk about cost and access and time. When it comes to the days previous to the World Wide Web, uh, you could connect to other machines and you could access their documents, but you had to coordinate with the other organization, which means you had to have meetings, which means you had to wait for availability, and then you had to prepare a program to be able to talk to the other machine, right? It wasn't that it wasn't possible, it's just that it took a long time. It required a special expertise. It was something that was challenging, right? What happened after the World Wide Web became widely implemented around 1996, although that was just the beginning or so, is that cost and that expertise and the amount of time that it took to be able to make that connection drop drastically, right? And so it was amazing that we could connect to machines all over the world and we could connect to information. And it has changed our world in profound ways that we're still trying to understand. When it comes to artificial intelligence, this is a capability that when I was in my younger days, it would take entire careers sometimes to be able to create a predictive model, right? Something that could determine, say, the failure points of a bridge. And now, or let's say, come 2010, people were embarking in, 7 or so years trying to do the same. Some of the promise of what we have today is to be able to do that real time. And so when we approach a generative AI platform like OpenAI's or like Claude from Anthropic and some of the other ones that are emerging. And we're going to be in a world where there's a multitude of these and they're going to be tuned to all sorts of interests. By the way, I was just talking to an MIT recent PhD who was focusing on fashion. But when we talk about being able to access this, it is again that leap in access, that leap in time, because everybody in the world, I talked about my mother, being able to use ChatGPT, and I asked her, who taught you how to use it? And she said, no one. I just opened the browser, clicked on a link, and started to use it. And so to think about the story arc of what it took and what it takes now, in that this is just the beginning. We talk about this, but really the public availability of it has come since the beginning of this year. And so that is something that takes our breath away, although there's a fair amount of concern, and we can talk about that if you like to. But it is something unlike anything I have seen in my career. The only comparison I can make is to the mid 90s, as the web used to be, was coming online, and there were courses of people trying to learn how to use email and so on. And there's a tremendous amount of excitement, but this is certainly different. And as I mentioned, when it comes to the application of AI and the talent that you need and this time that it takes, it is unlike anything.
Yeah. The and so I think there are people who are excited and enthusiastic and energized by the possibilities and embrace AI with caution, of course. We all think of that balance. But what what areas do you think the most excitement? I mean, every part of our lives are affected, but where do you see the fastest growth and the fastest acceptance of the use of AI, generative AI?
So I can talk about, the impacts that I see from contacts with companies, right? Companies are continuously reaching out to me, and you can imagine it's been a storm of activity since the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the background or the industries of these organizations are also as varied as they come. Just yesterday, I was talking about somebody from television. A couple of days ago, I was talking to somebody in banking, and it's been that side of the man. But you ask about productivity, and there are some very mature areas, and this is maturity within reason, right? Again, we have to
Right.
think of the shortness
Relative.
of this, and we think back to the beginning of summer as a long time ago. But when it comes to the type of uses, one of the things that we do as humans every day is that we engage around the products of writing and understanding that writing and analyzing that writing. That is the artifact that we use in order to coordinate our work, in order to assess the things that have been done. And guess what? Large language models are pretty good at that, right? And so I gave the example in the course of missing one of the lectures, and then afterwards, subsequently, making a summary. The lecture was 90 minutes. I then created a summary, which was a couple of pages, and I sent it to another colleague that had attended the lecture. And he told me, his comment was, I attended the lecture and I wouldn't have been able to summarize it that well. And so tremendous impacts there, 90 minutes to 5 minutes. And yes, there are times where you need a lot more depth, and that could be used as well. And at times you have to see it the whole 90 minutes and several times. As you mentioned, the same thing happens for books. Sometimes I have to read a chapter a couple times before I
Mm-hmm.
get it. But at other times, a high level summary is enough. And in those scenarios, that is tremendous, tremendous contribution, right? Now, the same thing happens for writing. I've been creating assignments this week for my course, residential course here, and I can write a sloppy sentence and ask the platform, make it better. I'm not saying make it better. I'm saying rephrase. This is one of the
Mm-hmm.
commands. And it does surprisingly well. And so these are things that we spend a tremendous amount of mental energy trying to get right. And now we have some support, right? And so it can help us write, it can help us summarize, and it can help us interpret. As you saw in the course as well, there are tremendous um, documents at times that we have to read, that are 100 pages long, and we want to start getting some insight into this without having to spend all that time. And when it comes to software engineering as well, I gave the example as well as coding live, and these are perhaps more specialized, but even just on the day to day, we answer email, we read documents, we analyze reports, we create reports, right? All of these have to do with writing. This provides us great help. And I should say that in the course, I always talked about supporting the human, what I like to call the augmented human. The machine by itself has limits. The human by itself has limits. But if you put them together, from my point of view, they're better than system and they're better than human. So the augmented human, I like to say.
I have to tell you, after I sort of settled after the course and let everything kind of absorb, then I had a meeting with my staff and I said, everyone here must incorporate AI, ChatGPT in whatever you do. And I gave examples from the course and I showed some examples and did some prompt examples as well. Everyone here is using in every way using this assistance, whether it's for our e-blast to get people's attentions, describing things on our website, writing summaries, comparing challenges with an account who we then have to have a counter proposal asking ChatGPT to give their version and comparing ours to theirs, where what did we miss, what did we add, and the more they use it, the more creative everyone is with it, and it's so exciting. Everybody is so energized, and the idea of this co-pilot or assistance that I learned about from you in the course is so helpful. In so many ways, and the more you use it, the more creative everyone is. Explain a little bit more about, which you have done in this introduction about usage, but even more about this potential, this co-pilot, this assistant, the frame that a bit more so people can be more imaginative about incorporated into their companies.
So let me provide you with a couple examples here. When it comes to, I talked about my career and helping organizations trying to make better decisions with data, right? If you think about the trajectory that organizations need to travel when it comes to making a decision with data, and they need to collect that data, they need to store that data, they need to process that data, they need to be able to serve, make it available, right? This has proven challenging over time, right? When it comes to being able to leverage this platform, one of the things that it can do is that it can reason over the data model that a database has. And it can do so readily. So if you think about your average organization, they have a database somewhere, right? And large organizations are known to have 2,000 databases, which are not connected. And I'll stay away from the challenges of integration.
Yeah.
But being able to talk to one of these databases means that you need a technical team. And there have been some products over time that have tried to simplify this by doing visual searches and simplifying some of it, but they have all had compromises. One of the advantages of this platform is to be able to, say, put a wrapper over this and to simply speak to it. And that is such a different type of access because it's exploratory and it has the full breadth of the capabilities of the platform, meaning conversational. Can simply walk up to it and ask it, for example, how many students are in my university? Of those students, how many of them come from Rhode Island? Those that come from Rhode Island, are there aspects that they have in common? I can start to have that type of exploration, right? Now, historically, the groups within an organization have had to make their case because you don't have infinite resources, and those technical teams have had to prioritize, which means most of the time you have to get on a queue and wait, right? The advantage of this is that you can now have that same sort of access, but do it without having to go through a technical team, right? And so that's a tremendous difference when it comes to data access. So I call it the democratization of data. Mm-hmm. Now, similarly, and harder to do is using AI. When it comes to being able to create a AI product, as you might remember from the course, it's a span of 6 to 18 months, right? And you have to have the talent, which is not hard, not easy to come by. You have to have the budget. Offers this summer for the people that know how to do this reached $1 million in the US, which is unheard of. And you need time, right? Now, surprisingly, you can start to do traditional AI by using this platform, meaning using conversational English. And the difference there in the time to be able to get something back, it's minutes, hours, days, as opposed to months, years. And so tremendous difference. And I'll try to ground it here into something simple, right? If you think about sentiment analysis, everybody wants to understand if what they're creating works, is satisfying, the customer or the stakeholder, right? And so be it television or retailers or governments and their citizens, they want to understand this. And so sentiment analysis is something that has been done for a while, right? When it comes to artificial intelligence. And typically you get the data set first, right? You curate it, you clean it, you prepare it, and that takes 2 to 3 months. Then you develop your predictive model, right? That is going to say positive or negative. And that takes another 2 to 3 months. And then you deploy this, and that might take 2 to 3 months. And so this could take half a year to over a year. You can do sentiment analysis out of the box today because the language model has enough context so that if you provided that text, it can say positive or negative, right? And that is something, again, from that year to minutes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is the type of impact. And again, you don't have to write it in software syntax or in a computer language. You can simply write it in English, right? You can say, literally, determine whether this text is positive or negative, right? And you can scale that. In fact, that's one of the assignments for my students this week, right? You can scale it. I gave them the comments from a talk that was sort of controversial, and it had over 10,000 comments on YouTube. And I asked them, determine whether this is positive or negative and use generative AI to do it. And I asked them a few more questions, spot the angry ones because you want to know if somebody's very angry, spot the ones that need a response, not just criticism and so on. And you can see, again, this is something that it'll be done in a week, right? And so tremendous, again, I go back to the parallels of the web, right? Not that it wasn't possible before, it was just much more expensive. Fewer had access, much slower.
And less democratic
Yes.
out of the box, which is
yes.
just amazing. And the more people that use it, the more opportunities there are because people who thought they couldn't be involved in it are. I think one of the big questions and one of the things I learned so much about and I'm so grateful was how actually the value of writing a good prompt, and understanding that. I mean, I think my first question to you in this line of prompts is what should people think about when they're writing a prompt? Just sort of that overview that you do so well.
So I'll talk about two use cases. There is a technical case in where you're writing a prompt much like I just described, right? Something that's going to scale and is going to handle potentially millions. And so you're using regular English or regular speech to be able to do that. But this is a more specialized case. And then there is the everyday user, right? And one of the things that I've noticed in myself is that even within the span of this year, my prompting has changed quite a bit. And that is we develop maturity. So it's much like, and I'm sure it's happened to you too, right? Yeah. Much like with traditional writing, we improve and we learn to be better. Now, over time, the platforms themselves will get better and we will improve as well. But there's a number of concerns that you want to address. One of them is context. So if you think about a new hire as one of the common examples, and you ask them to do something, they don't know, let's assume for a moment, that they don't know anything about your company, right? And so there are a number of things that they need to absorb in order for them to be able to contribute something to your organization, right? And so in this case, when we're talking about the context, what context are you responding in? And you saw me, say, you are a university professor, I think was one of the examples that I gave, and you're very hesitant to give predictions about the future and so on, right? And so you're providing some context there as to the persona. There is some tone as well, if you're asking it to generate, right? There's some tone that you want it to speak in. Like I have a friend that likes to have it speak in pirate English, right? He just enjoys getting his responses in pirate English, and it does pretty well, actually. There is as well there's the actual question you're posing, and then the format you wanted to answer in. And so there's tone, there's context, there is the action that you're asking, there is the response. And as you start to learn, you become more effective. So for example, write instructions for cooking spaghetti, and you might give it a block of text that is not a recipe, but that you want it to respond in one, boil water, two, put in pasta, etc. And so you might give it a few examples, right, of other recipes, and you can ask it to respond in that style, right? And so there's some guidelines that will help you. But as with writing, you can read the book about writing, elements of style, but really it's the writing itself that helps you grow, as a prompter.
Yeah, I just love so many of the examples that were given. I remember my first thought about prompts before I took the course was that it needed to be simple and I didn't want it to be too lengthy. And then I heard how many thousands of words can go into a prompt. There's like some crazy amount.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, have I been off base? And then the other thing is, you can identify the IQ. I think there was one conversation about if the IQ is too high, then it's, not relatable, or you can do all kinds of things in the tone. And I love New York accents. I'm a New Yorker, and every time I hear a New York accent from a certain area of New York, I write it phonetically in my mind. I've been doing that since I'm a kid. And so I asked GPT to write, I gave it a paragraph and I said, can you please write this with a New York accent? It was crazy because it did it phonetically the way I do that game. So I think the thing that, you explained very well is that there's the more you add, who the person is, where they're from, what the context is, adding information, all of that is so helpful. I had somebody send me a proposal for a movie on my life, and it was not exactly what my life is. And so I thought, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do this for me. And I, like you said, I gave it context and some more information, tone, and it came back with this incredible film idea in the film outline. And it also gave me the name, which is Invincible Threads, which is the name of my podcast now. And I wrote a book, I Am Invincible, and I never mentioned the book in that. And Threads is my game. So it was like I gave it data and it gave me back in just this magic. I think that the writer's strike recently really highlighted all the fears about this assistant or co-pilot that may become the pilot. And what is your point of view about that in context, let's say, of writers or screenwriters, and how they should approach this written sort of assist?
Great. So let me start off by talking about our ability to cope with change. Mary Shelley, a couple hundred years ago, the author of Frankenstein, wrote about that nothing is so frightening to humans as a sudden change. And if you look at the history of technology and how we have reacted, you'd be surprised. If you go back to the 1920s when radio was introduced, the reactions were dramatic. And in some ways, you can't fault people. All of a sudden you have this box in your living room and somebody speaking out of it. And this is completely revolutionary to anything that has been their life up until that point. But people were concerned about the value of young children, and it was warping the values of America's youth. People were concerned about crops. They thought that the radio waves would destroy, what people were planting. People were concerned about politics, and some strong parallels to our topic today, right? In the sense that they thought that no politician should be allowed to speak on the radio because it was too influential and it could change the balance of elections. There were even people calling for regulation and authorization of anything that was said on radio, right? And if you look at the age of jazz, you can imagine how people reacted at the age of television, similar things, right? And so music as this changed styles is a long history of that, right? So when it comes to the writer's strike, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I will make some comments on what I have seen. There's a concern about it, and there's some good columns written over the last few weeks in the New York Times about the outcome of this. And one of them has to do with the writers not necessarily wanting to block assistive technology, but wanting to be rewarded in a very clear way, because many previous revolutions have not really addressed the technology head on, and this one has, in this specific case, right? For example, one of the things that came out of it that I know is that the studios can now, at least in the first tentative agreement, we'll see where it ends up, use a generative AI engine to create a first draft. However, they must then pass it to a writer, and the writer must polish it, and the writer will be not rewarded, but will be paid in turn as if they had written it from the beginning, although that first beginning will be at the organization's minimum, or I forget, the guild's minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are some of the agreements that they have reached. However, as I look around the industry, it's hard for me to correlate or to extend that to all bases. Because, for example, your employees, as you mentioned, no doubt have become more productive, but you are not raising their salaries, right? If faculty can all of a sudden teach 5 courses instead of 3, their salary is not going to change, right? And so, and neither has, when Excel was introduced, when, Microsoft Word was introduced, when the PC was introduced, when, the web was introduced, salaries haven't changed. And so there are some issues about how that has been structured. But in some ways, this is a more labor regulations in the United States issue, right? That needs to be resolved. I can say that the co-pilot model, and I've talked about a number of industries that I have spoken with over the past year, and in fact, this is the conversation of AI has been going on for 10 years, right? Has been one of the augmented human, right? That you will continue to perform your duties as you were hired. However, you now have additional help, right? And I think in that role, one of the things that struck me that you said that your staff was energized. This is something that I've noticed of myself and many others, because there are things that are painful. I talked about writing a good sentence, right? That's painful to do. And if we can have someone do that for us or help us get there, that's pretty useful. Ultimately, my goal is not to write a beautiful sentence. My goal is to create an assignment. And so if I can get to creating the assignment quicker, that gets me closer to being able to do a loop in what I'm trying to do, right? I talked about the importance of learning fast in today's modern world, right? And so a lot of times, I have conversations with my friends from the business school, and they argue, no, it's still all about people. And I tell them it's the same thing. Where our goal is not to create management hierarchies. Our goal is to get to the value, right? In this case, I'll give the example again of teaching. It's not about managing a staff of 100 people supporting a course that gets distributed throughout the world. The goal is to deliver the knowledge to those that want it. And so if we can do that more efficiently, then we're winning, right? And if we can energize those that are doing it, that's even better, right? And so I take my own example, right? And that there's many things that I've done, and I gave examples, right? And where I'm doing them in 20% of the time. And it's not just that it's less work, it's that it energizes me. Why? Because I can get closer to that value that I'm pursuing. And I think that's perhaps, we can talk about ethics if you like lightly, because once we get there, we tend to not come back. That I think it's a tremendous contribution, because we're not talking here about replacing the human. We're talking about giving the human abilities, right?
Yeah.
And that I think it's something that we all appreciate.
Yeah, I think the essence is that the creative part of what you do, the core and the importance of what you do is then assisted by organization, framing, planning. I mean, I have a friend who does lectures all the time, and he uses AI to organize the weekend of lectures and when the coffee breaks come and doing all of that, which takes so much time that is wasted on you when the lecture itself is the most important thing. The content is the most important thing. And I think once you see that help and you see how beautifully written something is, you think,
yeah,
okay, I think I'm gonna go with this. I think just one final thing about the writers. I find the help I get when I'm writing something, and especially when you're writing a book or a document or even a handbook for the staff, you just have all of the points you need. You have the creative input on what it is you want to do. And then AI, you can ask AI a million questions and put out proposals and concepts and prompts. And then you gather all of that and then you edit that together. So you still control the content.
yeah.
It's getting information that would take months to pull together, no matter how experienced you are. You can't, that speed is just priceless. And that's why I guess salaries don't change, because it's less work in one way and more of that creative time in another, which we all love. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and that's a great way to frame it, because many universities are dealing right now with the challenge of how do we, because the artifact that we use to assess people is writing, right? So a thesis, a technical publication. And so if people are getting support or perhaps not writing it themselves, how do we think about that? And one of the initial responses that I like is that we make you responsible for what you're submitting. So that is, as you say, you are getting help, and perhaps it's doing the research for you, right? It's going out and gathering data and distilling it into some findings. And you're submitting this as saying, here is my work and my insights, right? In some ways, it doesn't matter where it comes from. If you're taking ownership from it, right? And you're standing behind it, then that is the measure, right? That the community will expect of you. And if you're in an organization, let's say you have somebody that used to spend their weeks doing spreadsheets and can now do them in 5 minutes, if they're taking responsibility for them, meaning their professional credit and evaluation is based on it, then it's wonderful that they can do it in 5 minutes, right? So
right, and also evaluating the response. And I know I reached out with a prompt asking the name of an architect for a famous structure in Abu Dhabi, and And I just couldn't remember the architect's name, but I knew the response I got was not correct. And so then I wrote back saying, then who is and I just asked a different architectural question about another structure in Abu Dhabi, and then it returned saying, I apologize. The information I gave you was incorrect, and I wasn't correcting it. I was just, once you recognize the answer to this question, you will realize. And so it was very interesting because I wasn't challenging AI, but it understood by that question that the last answer it gave me was wrong. So if I didn't question it, then I would have had the wrong answer had I submitted that as an answer to a test. We do have to have some control over the data, some understanding of the data that we're submitting. So you're right. I believe it definitely can't just be submitted and not analyzed and understood, which leads me to asking about the progressions of Chat GPT 3, 3.5, 4. So first of all, to simply explain to people who may not be familiar with the different phases of, I don't know if that's the right word, but of the different evolution of ChatGPT, and when is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 coming? Like, what's the what do you know about all of that?
So for those of you who are not familiar with these large language models platforms, and the most popular of them being ChatGPT, there are a number of them in the market now. There are perhaps the most well-funded, well, not perhaps, they are the most well-funded, which is OpenAI's ChatGPT. Then there's Anthropic's Claude. Meta has been investing heavily in AI, and so they have one called Llama that many people refer to. And so the business landscape is diversifying tremendously. And if you talk to the big tech vendors, they tend to offer 3 models. The very first one is build your own model based on open source, tremendously expensive, in the billions of companies that are following that approach. Others are fine-tuning it. You can think of, there's a writer from the New Yorker who did an experiment by having a company create a LLM to speak and write in his voice, which was quite interesting. A specialized focus just on this task, right? And you can look up online the article. It's quite interesting. And then there's the contextual learning that we have been talking about, where we write great prompts, which is within reach and it has democratized the access. And this is tremendously powerful. I would say just as powerful in most cases. So when it comes to the versions, people start to talk, we are in version 4. There's a number of differences in that, I could call out. But the short of it is that 4 is tremendously capable. It's a little bit more expensive if you use it at volume. For some things, 3.5 is pretty fast. And some people prefer it because for many tasks, it does perfectly well. The example that I gave, in fact, for my assignment in class and processing YouTube comments, does perfectly well. And people are starting to talk about version 5. I don't know when that will come. However, there's a number of developments that are starting to happen, and you're starting to get competition. And so this is becoming quite rich. And so you talked earlier about the number of words that you can put, and the upper bound was around 32,000 when it came to OpenAI's. And then Claude's from Anthropic came in with 100,000. And so you can already stick in a 100-page document and have a conversation over that 100-page document, right? There are new capabilities on ChatGPT that just came out last week, in where it can now speak to you and process images. So they have this wonderful demo. I encourage you all to navigate to their site and see it, where they take a picture of a bicycle and they're focusing on the area where the seat is. and they're asking ChatGPT, help me lower the seat. And the platform can process this image and give you step-by-step directions on how to lower that seat. The number of things that need to be done in a to be understood in order to be able to do that is tremendous. And they have other ones where you go to the refrigerator and you take a picture and you say, recommend me a recipe, right? And it'll do that as well. So the capabilities without new releases are increasing. There's also the ability, something that this is more technical, they call function calling, of being able to speak to it and have the speech be translated into a function call, which is important to be able to interface with other systems that might provide you additional functionality, like making reservations for dinner, for example, and coordinating between two people. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation in this space, and it is moving at a blinding pace. And so the big cloud vendors, for those of you who are in large organizations, will be knocking on your door, offering new things. The big companies across the board are all developing capabilities. The consultancies are doing the same. The LLM, large language model companies, are competing head on in hyper competitive space. And so I think as consumers of this technology, it's a wonderful time because we're going to be the beneficiaries of all of that. And if it was exciting before, it's only going to get more exciting.
One of the things I thought when I was planning to take this course was that maybe if I understood coding, I would be better at writing a prompt, and then what is the relevance of coding in this new age, and will obviously AI be coding for us? So give us a little update on the status of coding and young people all learning coding. Is this something they should still do, or should they be exploring other areas?
Sure. So in some ways, I'll start up broad and then I'll focus. I think of problem-solving ability when it comes to coding, right? And I like to talk about four components of this. One is decomposition. We all do it. When a problem is too big, we try to break it down so that there are pieces that we can make some progress on. The other one's pattern recognition of those small pieces. Are there things we've seen before that we know already how to solve? Then there is algorithms, which is a fancy name for recipes. You can think of them as processes that you have within an organization, something that we're writing down step by step how to do so we can repeat it. And the last one is abstraction. So we see something, a group of components, and we can do the opposite of decomposition. We can rise up and we can say, hey, all of these things are cats, although they all look different, right? So when it comes to coding, historically, this is the dimensions that we have moved in. But in reality, it's more of a general problem-solving set of skills, right? Big surprise, coding is going through a big revolution, right? In that the new or the innovations are being called low code or no code, meaning that we can create code now, but we can do it with much less code, and we can many times do things without code. So the skill that I'm grasping at here is structured thinking, right? So if you're going to create a prompt, much like if you're going to create a good block of text. By the way, those skills that I mentioned around coding, decomposition, and pattern recognitions, those apply to everything. If you're a musician, those apply to you. If you're a writer, those apply to you, right? And so in this case, I talked about that skill set in problem solving first, as I started to get more specific about coding, right? There's a tremendous amount that we can do now with low code. And so the problem-solving abilities continue to be just as important. However, the specifics when it comes to syntax, those are less so because we're getting much more support. For many of the things that are routine, some people call it boilerplate in the industry of software engineering, we can get those written for us. And the many platforms are learning from yourself as well. So I talked about using, I like to code live in class, and it provides me tremendous assistance because it's helping me actively as I'm writing. And so that's something that before I used to feel like I was flying without a net, at any time I could fall. And now I feel like somebody's there backing me up. Now, if I were to think about, people in their teens or in middle school or late elementary school, I think developing that structured thinking will be useful for your entire life. And so if you learn how to write code in the traditional way, think of it as a proxy for everything else that you're going to do. Now, when it comes to just pure productivity, that's less important now because you have a great deal of support there for you. And so that is something that hasn't been there at the maturity that we have it today. And there's a bunch of other things that come with it. For example, you have a new employee, there's a learning curve that they have to go through. This can help. You have an employee population that you want them to write safer code. This is something that can be aided by this. And so there's a bunch of opportunities beyond, when it comes to the software engineering group that are aided by these new technologies. But when it comes to learning to think, we like to say, writing code is a great way to do it. But you can do it by writing traditional prose or by learning an instrument. That it's those four components that I mentioned.
Yeah, I feel, and I recommend to teens to think about learning coding, to think in a certain way that I think is really appropriate during this time. And I still think it has value in it, obviously, with other fabulous assistants now. So I would say one of the things that I remember as a turning point for me in the course was learning about how AI thinks, which is it doesn't think, right? And the succession of words and how it uses that progress, and it doesn't compose a thesis with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Can you explain that? Because when I do explain that in my feeble way to friends, to say, understand that this is what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with thought, beginning, middle, end. They get it. All of a sudden, they get it. So if a professional can do this, I think it would be great. And I think this is the most profound response of understanding when I try to explain anything that I've learned.
So let me say the following before I get into that aspect of it. One of the things that has surprised me is the amount, and Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said it himself, is the amount of rancor and hate that they got from linguists, from other scientists as they started out. And the reason I say that is that in some ways it doesn't matter what it's actually doing. What it matters is that it can help you do your work, right? It is the usability, as I mentioned in the course, as opposed to what's under the hood. Now, what's under the hood is surprising. And this, if you have tolerance for for complexity, it's a fun thing to do. To give a high level description of how it works internally, or some of the foundations that have led to what we have today, it has to do with being able to guess the next word. And let me explain that by giving you part of a sentence. And the sentence would be, I got up this morning and if we think about the possibilities there, it could be, and I went to work, and I had breakfast, and I went for a run, and so on. Now, throughout time, when people have built these sort of systems, there's a number of ways in which you can create mechanisms to be able to create to guess this next word or to predict this next word. And what this platform has done is has found a mechanism to be able to scale and generalize this to everything there is, all of the text that exists. And out of that emerges emerging qualities. And these emerging qualities are that at a certain level of text, it can start to have emerging qualities such as comprehension, being able to carry out math, etc. And so that at its core is what it is. Now, the questions of reason, the questions of consciousness, I think we can use this platform without even addressing those. And the reason I say that is that if you're getting support in carrying out calculations, and I'm thinking out loud at this moment here, let's say you're using a calculator. You don't spend that much time thinking about the internals of the calculator. It is a tool that you're using to be able to carry out arithmetic, right? If you think about, the program, what's a widely used program that people have used for generations, Word or Excel, right? This has a great deal of code, and we've used it without really thinking that much about what's behind the scenes. When you think about this platform, you can think about it in similar ways. It has a capability to do a certain number of tasks, and those are increasing. And it's making artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, you can think of it as classification and predictions. And classification is this an apple or is this a pear? And that has been really productive because you can hold up a loan and say, is this a better loan or is that a better loan? And there's a bunch of applications like, is the car on the road or is the car on the side of the road, right? And when it comes to predictions, you can look at a number and say, is this a 3 or a 5? And so these are the capabilities of traditional AI. There was concern about AI, but not to the level that you have now with language. And part of it is that it's been democratized, as we've said. Everybody can use it. But at its heart, at its core, it is using neural networks to be able to make that prediction of the next word, right? And everything else emerges from it. So it's, those that criticize it point to its shortcomings. However, it is amazing what it can do, right? And I continue, just a couple of days ago, I wrote to another colleague and I said, take a look at what he did. I asked it a question and the quality of the response is something that I would not have guessed. And so it is a tremendous tool, and we can think of it as a tool.
So one of the things question I have is in the next most likely to that sentence, if in your prompt you're writing it as a person who has a certain IQ and wants this written with a sense of humor and has all of these caveats, the obvious next words keep changing according to what you put in the prompt. So it is nuanced, and it does have characteristics that your prompt is feeding it. So it does have nuances in some ways that I think give it personality and character and make a difference in the outcome of what the next word is going to be, that I find interesting and maybe not as sterile as critics might suggest. So I do find that sort of fun and interesting. So I have so many questions to ask, but I don't want to keep you forever. So in my last request is for you as a professor to give my audience a challenge. Give us something that we should do using AI, and make it a little challenging. So we have to do a little a little work, and let's see how we do. So you think I should give you a minute for that, but something that that you think might be fun for us to do and also enlighten us into the possibilities and capabilities of AI.
So I think one of the aspects of large language models that hasn't been discussed that much is its capability to be able to democratize AI. And I talked about a number of examples. And so the challenge would be, go to your favorite site and take a comment. I like photography, so you could go to B&H or many of whatever site you like. Take a nice big comment and then ask the platform to classify this. And what I mean by that is to determine the sentiment, right? Is this positive or is this negative? So use that as a first attempt. And part of that is to provide the platform some instructions, because like anyone else, it needs to know where your comment starts and how do you direct it. And it'll take you a few attempts. For example, you might say, I'm going to ask you to classify the following text, and you want to delimit it, say, with triple quotes or with some other indicator, right? So you're starting to structure a prompt. Now, once you can successfully do that, ask it to spot if this is an angry email. An angry message, right? And you could do the same thing with email, by the way. You could make an automatic processor of email and even determine to what department this email should be sent. Once you manage that, try to get it to generate a response. And as you go through these three concerns, you might ask it as well to start to classify. This is harder because you only have one message, right? But you can imagine that some of those messages would be better for marketing. Some of them might be better for shipping. Some of them might be better for product experience, right? But you can start to see that you're applying AI, but you're doing it with simple language, meaning common language with English, right? And so don't expect this to get it right the first time. You'll have to work at your clarity. You'll have to work at your response. And as a bonus or extended challenge here, you might want to get it to respond in a structured format. So JSON, for example, written JSON, not the name, is a common format. So that would be the stretch. The other one would be a very common thing for many organizations to try to understand what customers or stakeholders feel about their products or their organization.
Very good. So I think what we'll do is we'll write out the steps in what you've suggested as a backup to this. And when we promote this on Instagram and social, we'll include that so that we can see how many people actually take on the challenge. And I'm looking forward to it too. I would always look at these challenges with fear and anxiety during the course, and then end up loving the experience of it. And I absolutely loved having this time with you, Abel. I appreciate it so much. I hope you'll come back again when we can talk about the advancements and wonders of all that's happening, and maybe even have a fashion discussion about it too, and the applications, since I do have a fashion following. And thank you so much. This was so much fun. I really appreciate your taking the time with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a joy to get to share some of our ideas, and take care. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.